the kitchen gone cold. The first thing I noticed was the brass handle on the front door. It was polished. Too polished. Maya never let them buff the brass all the way down to a mirror shine. She used to say that a restaurant's door should show the warmth of the thousands of hands that had pulled it open, hungry and expectant. She liked the patina. She called it the fingerprint of hospitality. But today, standing on the pavement, with the chill of a Tuesday morning biting through my wool coat, the handle was glaring, sanitized, and entirely stripped of history. My daughter had been buried exactly 5 days ago. 5 days. And already, her $20 million culinary empire was being scrubbed of her memory. I pushed the door open. The bell above it, the heavy iron one she'd found in an antique market in Provence, was gone. In its place was a sleek, silent electronic chime that whispered like a corporate elevator. I stood in the entryway of Hearth and Vine, the flagship restaurant Maya had built from nothing but a culinary degree, a cast-iron skillet, and a terrifying amount of sheer will. The hostess stand, previously a reclaimed oak barrel, had been replaced by a sharp, minimalist glass podium. The massive chalkboard where Maya used to handwrite the daily specials with flour dusted on her apron was entirely wiped clean. In its place hung a cold, glowing digital screen displaying a QR code. The air felt wrong. A restaurant of this caliber has a pulse. A scent that lives in the walls, even when the burners are off. It should smell of roasted garlic, deep reductions, and the faint, sweet memory of charred wood. Today, it smelled of industrial bleach and lemon-scented floor wax. Like a hospital. Like the morning had been professionally removed overnight. "Evelyn, you shouldn't be here." The voice came from the dining room. Julian didn't look surprised to see me. And he certainly didn't look like a grieving widower. He looked prepared. He was wearing a sharp, slate-gray suit. The kind that costs more than a line cook makes in a month. No greeting. No offered chair. No shared silence for the woman we had both just put into the earth. Just a flat, administrative dismissal. I stepped fully inside anyway, letting the heavy door click shut behind me. "Where is the reservation book?" I asked quietly, my eyes scanning the empty glass podium. The leather one Maya kept. "It's in the dumpster out back," Julian replied, adjusting his cuffs. It was archaic. "We're fully integrating the booking system to a cloud-based app. It's cleaner. Cleaner." That word settled somewhere deep in my chest. Right next to the hollow space where my daughter used to be. The large, open-concept kitchen loomed behind him. The kitchen Maya had designed, down to the millimeter. The copper pots she insisted on hanging where the guests could see them. The expediter station where she used to stand on Friday nights, commanding the chaos with a voice that was equal parts velvet and steel. She built this place with her own oversight. She used to stand right there, wipe the sweat from her brow, and say, "Mom, this kitchen will outlive me." Julian folded his arms across his chest. Not defensive. Contained. Arrogant. "You're not welcome here anymore, Evelyn," he said calmly, his voice echoing slightly in the empty dining room. "Your sentimental traditions are dead. Go grieve at home. I have a business to run." There are sentences that bruise. That one cut clean to the bone. I felt something inside me go very still. Not anger, not tears, but a profound, terrifying stillness. For a full second, I watched his face carefully. No trembling lip. No red rims around his eyes. Only the eager anticipation of a man who had finally been handed the keys to the kingdom he never helped build. "My name is Evelyn Rossi. I raised Maya Rossi from nothing but faith, discipline, and the stubborn belief that a woman's hands can build an empire if she works hard enough. I watched her build this restaurant group from a single food truck to a national phenomenon. And I was standing in her flagship dining room, being dismissed like expired inventory. by a man who couldn't even poach an egg. If you are listening to my voice right now, kindly tell me where you are listening from in the comments. Because what happened over the next few weeks changed everything I understood about inheritance, greed, and the power of a mother's silence. Julian stepped closer, lowering his voice, like he was explaining basic arithmetic to a slow child. It's better this way, Evelyn. The estate is passing entirely to me. We are rebranding, scaling up. We need space to modernize without you hovering around looking for ghosts. Space. 5 days ago, he stood beside me at the graveside, holding a black umbrella, playing the part of the shattered husband for the cameras and the culinary press. Today, he was clearing square footage. I am just here for her knives, I said, keeping my voice utterly devoid of the tremor that was fighting to take over my throat. You've made your point, Julian, but I am taking her personal tools. You've stayed long enough, he replied, checking his watch as if my grief was throwing off his schedule. There it was again. Not rage. Certainty. He believed he was completely, untouchably in charge. I walked past him without waiting for permission. The walk across the dining room felt longer than I remembered. My sensible shoes echoed too loudly. Against the reclaimed brick floors, Maya had fought the contractors to install. Durability matters more than cost, Mom, she had told me. Everything about this room carried her fingerprint. Every corner held her voice. I pushed through the swinging metal doors into the kitchen. The stainless steel prep tables were unervingly spotless. The stoves were cold. In the small, glass-walled chef's office in the back, Maya's things were exactly where she had left them. Before the sudden aneurysm took her, in the middle of a Tuesday dinner service. Her heavy leather knife roll sat on the desk. I unrolled it carefully, mechanically. My hands did not shake. That frightened me more than if they had. Inside, the carbon steel blades gleamed, meticulously sharpened, oiled, and perfect. The chef's knife with the worn wooden handle that I had bought her when she graduated from culinary school. The small paring knife she used for delicate garnishes. Out in the dining room, I heard movement. A contractor's voice. Julian giving orders. Tear out the brick, I heard him say. It's too rustic. I want polished concrete. Modern. Fast. He wasn't grieving. He was reorganizing. He was stripping the soul out of the building. I paused before rolling the leather back up. And I looked around the small office one last time. Maya had transferred the entire restaurant group, all 3 locations and the intellectual property, into a complex estate structure the year the flagship opened. She told me she wanted things protected. Just in case, Mom, she had said once, almost casually, while tasting a spoonful of demi-glace. Just in case. I secured the leather straps of the knife roll. When I pushed back through the swinging doors, Julian had moved to the front entrance, standing beside a man holding a clipboard. Julian looked like a bouncer who had already finalized the VIP list. You understand, Julian said softly as I approached the door. I did understand. Just not the way he thought. I held the heavy leather roll against my chest. The new electronic chime beeped a sterile goodbye. As I stepped out into the cold morning air, the door closed behind me with a slow, deliberate click. Evelyn Rossi does not pack up her daughter's life like a woman who expects to be defeated. And I do not scatter tears on the pavement for men who evaluate human life in profit margins. I walked to my car with the measured, precise, steady stride of a woman who had spent 30 years on her feet in commercial kitchens. My face was a mask of stone. When I got home to my quiet, small house, I placed the knife roll in the center of my dining table. It smelled faintly of rosemary and steel. Her smell. Nothing in that massive restaurant felt like hers anymore. My fingers traced the worn leather, my body trying to control something. Anything. I stopped myself, breathed once, deeply and focused. I wasn't there for the noise of grief. I was there for Maya. Not the heavy things. Not the visible things. The small things only a mother understands. Inside the knife roll, tucked into a small zippered pouch, was her tasting spoon. A tiny silver spoon she carried in her apron pocket every single day. I held it in my palm. I didn't cry. I had already done that part in the dark of my bedroom, where nobody could watch and turn my heartbreak into commentary. Now, grief sat in my chest like a physical weight, and I moved around it, accommodating its mass. Maya did not inherit that $20 million empire. She built it. Recipe by recipe, late night by late night, burn by burn. I remember her in a flour-stained apron, arguing fiercely with a venture capitalist about sourcing local ingredients, refusing to compromise quality for a cheaper bottom line. I remember blueprints for the flagship kitchen, spread across this very dining table years ago. The corners held down with jars of dried beans, because the ceiling fan kept lifting the pages. She would look up at me, eyes dark and blazing with passion. Proud not of the money, but of the precision. "This brand will outlive me," she used to say, grinning. I used to scold her for speaking like that. I would tap her hand with a wooden spoon and tell her not to invite bad luck. She would laugh and kiss my cheek. "I'm not inviting death, Mom. I'm saying it's built right. It's protected." Protected. At the time, I thought she meant the LLCs, the corporate shielding, the standard business insurance. I didn't understand she meant the paperwork, underneath the paperwork. The year the flagship was completed, Maya had called me one afternoon, sounding exhausted but victorious. She told me casually that she had placed the entire company into an estate structure the same day the final health inspection cleared. She spoke about it like filing a standard tax return, like installing a fire suppression system in the hoods. "It's handled," she had told me, her voice crackling over the phone, over the sound of sizzling pans. "Nobody can just come in and gut it." Nobody. I hadn't asked what that meant. I trusted her implicitly. But standing in my quiet dining room, looking at her silver tasting spoon, that word returned to me with a completely different temperature. Handled. Nobody can just gut it. I checked my phone. No calls. No apologies from Julian. No message telling me he had spoken out of grief, and to please come back inside. The silence radiating from his end wasn't the silence of mourning. It was the silence of cold, calculated strategy. The next week was an exercise in agonizing observation. The culinary world in our city is small, and information travels much faster than official press releases. The calls and texts from former staff started arriving within days. "Evelyn, he fired Chef Marcus," a sous chef texted me, the words heavy with disbelief. Marcus had been Maya's right hand since the food truck days. Nobody accused Julian publicly yet. Nobody shouted. They whispered. And in the restaurant industry, whispers carry far more truth than grand announcements. At first, I tried to tell myself it was just business. Some people grieve by taking control, by surrounding themselves with action, to avoid the crushing weight of silence. But then the photos began appearing on social media. Images sent to me by loyal patrons, too afraid to comment publicly. Julian hosting a vision dinner in the flagship's private dining room. The room was full of men in corporate suits. Champagne glasses lifted where Maya's hand-thrown pottery vases had once sat. Catering trays of mass-produced appetizers were balanced on the same reclaimed oak tables Maya had sanded herself. I stared at one picture in particular. A woman in a sharp blazer leaning forward, laughing, her lipstick inches from a framed photograph of Maya. That Julian had clearly moved to a less prominent shelf. She was smiling like she had just purchased the venue for pennies. Maya used to walk barefoot across that dining room floor at 2 in the morning, holding a glass of cheap wine. admiring the space like it was a living, breathing entity. Now, Julian was turning it into a sterile cash register. Within 10 days, the gatherings got louder. Corporate interior designers started walking through the locations with iPads. I heard about cheap vinyl fabric samples being draped over the custom banquettes. Paint swatches held against the warm, exposed brick walls she had obsessed over. Julian's new corporate friends began using a new phrase in the industry blogs. The CEO. They said it like it was a coronation, not a tragic circumstance. CEO Julian, one article quoted, detailing his plans to franchise the Hearth and Vine name to 50 fast casual locations across the Midwest. I could see his face without being in the room. I could see that small, controlled smirk he wore when he believed something had settled permanently in his favor. It wasn't the champagne that unsettled me. It was the terrifying speed. The speed of the replacement. The speed of the control. The speed of a man acting like a tedious waiting period had finally ended. Then came the rumors of the buyout. A national conglomerate known for buying beloved local brands and stripping them of their quality to maximize profit margins was circling. Julian was preparing to sell the national franchising rights. Transfer what? I sat in my kitchen, holding my phone, reading a text from a former manager. The title, the recipes, the authority to ruin her name. Transfer when? I asked myself. And that is when the cold, hard clarity finally settled over me. Julian had said the estate was passing entirely to him. He was acting like the transfer was already a done deal. But nobody gets a flagship restaurant that quickly, unless they believe nothing can stop them. Nobody signs franchising deals that boldly, unless they think the brand is already legally theirs. And nobody tells the mother of the founder to go grieve at home, unless they have already decided she is a useless piece of clutter in their new empire. That night, I did not cry. I did not call Julian to scream. I opened the small wooden box where I kept important documents, and I pulled out the business card Maya's estate attorney had given me at the hospital, right after the doctors had pronounced her dead. I held the crisp, white card under the kitchen pendant light. The attorney's name was printed in sharp, black ink. Cold. Professional. I remembered Maya's text message from years ago. It's handled. Nobody can just gut it. I read the text again in my mind. And for the very first time, I stopped hearing the reassurance of a confident daughter. I started hearing the warning of a brilliant businesswoman. I understood something then, even if I didn't fully know how the mechanics of it worked. Julian believed that removing me meant he had absolute control. He believed that saying it out loud made it an undeniable truth. But some empires are built with clauses buried deep in the foundation. And Julian had just spoken the entirely wrong sentence to the entirely wrong woman. I did not start dialing right away. I sat there with both hands flat on the dining table, feeling the solid wood beneath my palms, feeling my pulse thudding with a slow, heavy rhythm in my throat. I kept seeing Julian's face at the restaurant door. Not angry, not mourning, just decided. I could still hear the way he said it. Clean, controlled, as if cruelty was something he had practiced in the mirror. My chest felt tight, but I refused to let it spill over into panic. If I argued with him, I would become noise. If I begged him to preserve her recipes, I would become pathetic proof of my own powerlessness. I reached for my phone and dialed the number on the business card. The phone rang twice before a receptionist answered. Her voice was bright, practiced, entirely unsuited for the weight I was carrying. Good evening, law offices of Vance and Sterling. I need to speak to Mr. Sterling, I cut in gently, my voice steady. Regarding the estate administration of Maya Rossi. There was a pause. The sound of keys tapping. May I tell him who is calling? I kept my voice perfectly even. Evelyn Rossi. Her mother. The line went soft. I listened to the faint, cheerful hold music. staring at my reflection in the dark kitchen window. My eyes were wide, but entirely dry. My jaw was set like a woman holding herself upright on purpose. The attorney came on the line. His voice was calm, neutral, and did not waste a single syllable. "Mrs. Rossi, I am very sorry for your loss." He said my name the way people say it, when they understand the gravity behind it. Careful. I didn't greet him like an old friend. I didn't mention my grief. I kept it brutally simple because I did not want emotion to blur the sharp edge of my point. I was banned from the flagship restaurant, I said. That was it. 8 words. Plain as a slammed door. Silence answered me on the other end. Not the silence of confusion. Not the silence of a man searching for polite condolences. It was the silence of stark recognition. Like I had just spoken the exact, specific phrase. He had been sitting at his desk waiting to hear. I tightened my grip on the phone. "Julian told me I am not welcome on the property. He told me to leave." Mr. Sterling exhaled softly into the receiver. I could hear it. Controlled, professional, but carrying the distinct weight of a line being officially crossed. "When exactly did this occur, Mrs. Rossi?" he asked. His tone had shifted. Still calm, but now sharpened with intense legal purpose. "Last Tuesday." "The morning after the funeral," I replied. Another pause. I heard the distinct rustle of heavy paper moving on his end. My stomach tightened, not with fear, but with the profound sensation that the earth was tilting on its axis. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't offer a tissue through the phone. He asked the kind of questions attorneys ask when comfort is no longer the objective. "Did you leave the premises involuntarily?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "I was told my traditions were dead, and I was instructed to leave." "Were there witnesses?" That question made my spine snap perfectly straight. "Yes," I said carefully. "A contractor was standing right behind him. I don't know the man's name, but he was there." Mr. Sterling was quiet again. I stared at my own hands. The strong, aged hands that had taught Maya how to hold a chef's knife. Those hands were absolutely still now. "Mrs. Rossi," he said finally, his voice dropping into a register that commanded absolute attention. "I need you to come into my office tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock sharp." I swallowed. "Is there a specific reason?" I asked, needing the ground to stop shifting just for a moment. "Mrs. Rossi," he said, slower this time, "there are highly specific provisions in place. I need to see you in person. Bring your identification. And do not, under any circumstances, communicate with Julian tonight." My heart thudded hard once against my ribs. Provisions in place. Not sympathy. Structure. "I will be there," I said. The call ended. I sat in the quiet dark of my kitchen, the silence ringing in my ears like a warning bell. That Julian had been too arrogant to hear. The taste of consequence. By the time the sun rose, my body had already accepted that it would not be permitted to sleep. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of black coffee that had long gone cold, my sensible leather purse packed as if I were going into a courtroom. I did not dress in the heavy, suffocating black of mourning. I dressed in a tailored navy blazer, a crisp white blouse, and simple pearl earrings. I wore the clothes of a woman who was preparing to inspect a kitchen line. I needed my face to look steady, the way I wore it when Maya opened her first restaurant. And the critics were sitting at the corner table. I kept hearing Mr. Sterling's words from the night before echoing in the quiet house. Provisions in place. Come in tomorrow. Do not communicate with Julian. Every time the memory replayed, the same sensation rose in my chest. It wasn't the thrill of victory. It was the cold, heavy realization that a door was swinging shut somewhere in the dark, and Julian was standing on the wrong side of it. Julian, meanwhile, was moving through his mourning, assuming the crown was securely fastened to his head. I knew this because a former bartender who still worked the morning prep shift at the flagship texted me at dawn. He's got the franchise lawyers in the private dining room, the text read. They are popping champagne. He brought in his own caterer for breakfast. I didn't ask for further details. I didn't need the picture painted with any more clarity. I could see it perfectly. Julian, seated at the head of Maya's custom-built table, his voice loud and expansive, surrounded by men speaking in that hushed, reverent tone people use when $20 million is sitting in the room. When I arrived at the towering glass and steel building that housed the law offices of Vance and Sterling, the underground parking garage was mostly empty. It was early. The city was still waking up. I took the elevator to the 40th floor, the doors opening to a reception area that smelled of expensive leather and polished mahogany. Lives do not explode in rooms like this. They are carefully, surgically reorganized. I expected quiet. I expected to sit alone. Instead, as I turned the corner into the main waiting area, I saw Julian. He was standing near the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the city skyline like he owned it. He was wearing a different suit today. Navy pinstripe, aggressive, tailored to within an inch of its life. He wasn't alone. He was flanked by two men holding sleek briefcases. They were speaking in low, confident tones, laughing softly at something Julian had just said. Julian didn't look toward me at first. When he finally turned and noticed me, standing near the receptionist's desk, his mouth pressed into a thin, irritated line. It wasn't a smile. It was the look of a man encountering a minor traffic delay. He turned back to his lawyers quickly, dismissing me from his reality. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't sweating. He looked entirely ready to sign the final transfer papers and walk out a multimillionaire. The receptionist called my name softly. Mrs. Rossi, Mr. Sterling is ready for you. I smoothed the front of my blazer once and followed her down a long hallway. Julian and his team trailed behind me, Julian walking with a heavy, entitled step. Mr. Sterling's office door was open. He stood when I entered. Not out of dramatic flair, but out of old-fashioned, ingrained respect. His face was composed, but his eyes were sharp, calculating, moving from me to Julian. Mrs. Rossi. Julian, Mr. Sterling said, gesturing to the heavy leather chairs arranged in front of his massive desk. We sat. I took the chair on the far left. Julian took the center chair, spreading his arms over the armrests, taking up as much physical space as possible. His lawyers sat behind him. Mr. Sterling did not waste time with pleasantries. He didn't ask how we were holding up. He opened a thick, pristine file on his desk, aligning the corners of the paper, as if he were building a clean line of indisputable truth. Thank you all for coming, Mr. Sterling said, his voice dropping into a professional, measured cadence. This meeting concerns the administration of the Maya Rossi Living Trust and the affiliated corporate entities. Julian leaned forward, a confident smirk playing on his lips. Let's get this wrapped up, Sterling. I have a meeting with the National Franchise Acquisition Team at noon. Just tell me where I need to sign to finalize the transfer of the operational authority. Mr. Sterling did not look up from the file. He turned a single page. The sound of the thick paper moving felt louder than anything else in the room. Julian, Mr. Sterling said calmly, this meeting is not a transfer finalization. This meeting concerns a breach of the trust provisions. The word breach sat between us, like a lit match dropped on a dry floor. Julian blinked, his smirk faltering for a fraction of a second before returning. A breach? What are you talking about? I inherited the estate. I'm the surviving spouse. The business is mine to scale as I see fit. He said it like a fact that didn't require defending. He said it like he was reminding an employee of their place. Mr. Sterling exhaled through his nose. A short, restrained sound. Did you read the trust documents carefully, Julian? Specifically, the addendums regarding the corporate governance of Hearth and Vine. Julian's chin lifted aggressively. I read what mattered. The assets transferred to me. Mr. Sterling's eyes didn't move from the page. That may be the fundamental issue, he replied, his tone devoid of mockery, possessing only surgical precision. He ran a finger down a column of text. The trust indeed grants the surviving spouse the primary financial beneficial interest of the liquid assets and net profits. Julian relaxed his shoulders slightly, glancing back at his lawyers as if to say, "See." However, Mr. Sterling continued. And that single word shifted the entire atmospheric pressure of the room. It also grants Maya Rossi's mother, Evelyn Rossi, a protected status regarding the operational legacy and physical premises of the flagship restaurant. Julian's nostrils flared. She is not involved in the business, he snapped, the words coming out too fast. She's a grieving mother. I told her to stay home. Mr. Sterling held up a hand, slowing the room back into order. Protection is not dependent on her daily employment, Julian. It is an absolute right, woven into the corporate charter. Julian leaned back, crossing his arms tightly. She chose to leave the restaurant. I am the CEO now. He said it as if his newly printed business cards could erase the legal reality sitting on the desk. Mr. Sterling looked up, his gaze locking onto Julian. Julian, we have a documented report of hostile displacement. Julian laughed. He actually threw his head back and laughed. A short, sharp, incredulous sound. Displacement, please. I told her sentimental traditions were over, and she needed to leave so my contractors could work. I need space to run a $20 million company. She was in the way. His laughter hung in the air for a beat, expecting his lawyers to join in. They didn't. They sat perfectly still, their eyes fixed on Mr. Sterling. Mr. Sterling did not smile. He waited until the silence choked Julian's amusement. Then he flipped to another page. Section 4.3. The Legacy Clause, Mr. Sterling read, his voice taking on the weight of a gavel striking wood. If the protected party, Evelyn Rossi, is displaced from the flagship premises by hostile conduct, interference, banishment, or any act by the surviving spouse that results in her involuntary vacating. Julian's mouth opened slightly. The color began to drain from his face. The surviving spouse's operational authority and voting shares convert automatically, Mr. Sterling finished. Converts, Julian repeated, the words stumbling out of his mouth. It didn't fit in his vocabulary the way CEO or franchise had. Mr. Sterling nodded once. Your operational control and voting rights convert to zero. You become a passive, non-voting income beneficiary. The designated brand guardian assumes absolute administrative and operational control of the entire Hearth and Vine corporate entity. Julian stared at him. Then he stared at the file. Then back at the lawyer, as if expecting the punchline to a very bad joke. That's not how it works, he whispered. His voice had lost all of its polished shine. It is exactly how it works, Mr. Sterling replied evenly. Because Maya Rossi wrote it that way. Julian swallowed. I watched his throat work, trying to force the terrifying reality down. His fingers gripped the armrests of his chair so tightly, his knuckles turned stark white. The confident corporate shark was evaporating in real time. Show me, Julian demanded, his voice cracking. Show me the clause. Mr. Sterling reached into a separate, thinner folder and pulled out a document. It was printed on heavy, watermarked paper. He slid it across the mahogany desk, stopping it exactly at the edge where Julian's tense fingers rested. This is the executed legacy amendment. It governs the conversion trigger. Julian snatched it up, his eyes darting frantically down the page, hunting for loopholes. hunting for any legal jargon his team could twist to save his multi-million-dollar payday. I watched his face cycle through stages of panic, confusion, raw irritation, and finally, a devastating disbelief. "This is ridiculous," Julian muttered. "This isn't enforceable." "She wouldn't." He stopped mid-sentence. His eyes locked onto the top of the page, where a date was printed in stark black ink. He read the date once, then again, slower. Mr. Sterling let the date do its work. I saw Julian's jaw clench so hard, a muscle twitched violently in his cheek. "Executed exactly 6 months prior to her passing," Mr. Sterling clarified. Not to taunt him, but to nail the coffin shut. 6 months. 6 months before the aneurysm. 6 months before Julian started taking meetings with corporate franchise buyers. 6 months before he ever told me my traditions were dead. "That can't be right," Julian whispered, a genuine tremor entering his voice. His hand shook slightly, rattling the heavy paper. I sat quietly, watching him unravel, and a memory rose up in my mind. Not mine. His. I could see the exact moment playing out behind his panicked eyes. A family dinner at his and Maya's house 6 months ago. Julian had drank too much wine and started holding court at the table, talking about how the restaurant business was just math and marketing. I remembered him laughing and saying, "When we decide to cash out, we'll strip the menu down, automate the kitchen, and sell the name to the highest bidder. It's just a brand, Maya." Maya had sat perfectly still at the head of her table, looking at her husband. She hadn't yelled. She hadn't argued. She had simply gone quiet. Julian was looking at the paper, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. He hadn't been quiet enough. He had spoken his arrogant plans out loud, assuming his brilliant, fiercely protective wife wouldn't take him seriously, assuming she was too in love, too busy to protect the empire she built with her bare hands. "She never said anything," Julian murmured, the paper dropping slightly in his hand. "Maya did not confront," Mr. Sterling said softly. "She structured." The word structured hit Julian like an insult. It meant his wife had seen him with absolute clarity. It meant she trusted the binding power of legal ink over his empty promises. This is millions of dollars," Julian said, his voice shrinking, stripped of all authority. "I'm in the middle of a buyout negotiation. They're expecting my signature today." "You do not have the authority to sign anything," Mr. Sterling corrected him calmly. "You do not have the authority to change a recipe, fire a line cook, or alter a single napkin in that restaurant." Julian's breathing became shallow, rapid. He looked like a man trying to make himself smaller, so the consequences wouldn't hit as hard. He looked back at his lawyers. They were entirely silent, their faces grim. They read the room, and they read the airtight legal document. They knew it was over. So, Julian stammered, looking back at Mr. Sterling. "I get nothing. You retain a fixed financial stipend from the net profits," Mr. Sterling said. "Acting as the corporate accountant now, as a passive beneficiary. But you have zero operational control." Julian's head lifted. His eyes, completely unfocused, scanned the room, as if Maya might walk through the door and explain this was all a terrible misunderstanding. For the first time since the funeral, he looked completely unguarded. He looked terrified. His gaze finally shifted to me. There was no arrogance left, no calculation, just a desperate, hollow panic. "This is because of you," he whispered. The accusation had no heat behind it. It was a plea. He leaned forward, his elbows digging into his knees. "Evelyn, please, tell them you misunderstood me. Tell them you weren't displaced. If this buyout falls through, I look like a fool to the board." Silence stretched across the massive office. I didn't move. There was a version of me, decades ago, who might have tried to smooth things over to keep the peace. But I remembered the polished brass handle, I remembered the sterile electronic chime. I remembered him telling me my daughter's traditions were dead. I looked at Julian, keeping my posture perfectly still. I did not misunderstand you, Julian, I said, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of iron. You told me to leave. So I left. Julian swallowed hard. His eyes darted around the room. The walls of his imagined empire rapidly closing in on him. If humiliation had a physical weight, it was crushing him into the leather chair. The man who believed ownership was a divine right was realizing it was entirely conditional. Please, Julian begged, his voice stripped of every ounce of pride. Evelyn, we can fix this. I'll rehire the staff. I'll put the chalkboards back. I left the attorney's office 20 minutes later without looking back. I didn't feel a rush of vindictive joy. I felt a profound, heavy sobriety. Outside, the city was alive, the traffic roaring, the sun bright and exposing. I did not go back to the restaurant that day. I let the legal machinery do its work. When power leaves a man like Julian, it doesn't leave quietly. It leaves in a chaotic scramble of panicked phone calls and broken contracts. The corporate buyers pulled out the moment Julian's lawyers admitted he lacked signatory authority. The massive payday he had been bragging about evaporated into thin air. He tried to fight it, of course. He tried to claim I was emotionally unstable, that the clause was executed under duress. But Maya's paperwork was as flawless and unbreakable as her culinary technique. The trust held firm. When Mr. Sterling officially handed me the operational documents, establishing me as the sole brand guardian, the role didn't feel like a prize. It felt like a sacred duty. It was the authority to stop harm before it became a tragedy. I returned to Hearth and Vine 2 weeks later. The sterile electronic chime was gone. The heavy, antique iron bell was back above the door, ringing out a warm, resonant welcome as I stepped inside. The hostess stand was reclaimed oak once again. The air smelled fiercely of roasted garlic, deep reductions, and charred wood. Julian was there. He wasn't wearing a sharp suit. He was sitting at a small table near the back, looking over a financial statement that he had no power to act upon. He received his monthly stipend, a comfortable allowance. But he was a ghost in the empire he had tried to conquer. He could sit in the dining room, but he couldn't give a single order. He looked up when I walked in. He didn't sneer. He didn't speak. He just looked away, his shoulders slumped in defeat. I walked past him, my sensible shoes tapping a steady rhythm against the brick floor. I pushed through the swinging metal doors into the kitchen. The heat of the line hit my face. The cooks were moving with urgent, practiced grace. Chef Marcus was back at the expediter station, calling out orders. I stood in the corner, holding Maya's small silver tasting spoon in my pocket. I watched the kitchen breathe. I watched the legacy survive. Julian thought that removing me would make him the absolute master of the house. He never realized that a mother is the mortar in the foundation. He never realized that I was the very clause that kept the entire empire standing. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you are here.